Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about raiding in tournament games specifically that you can also use in your own games. We're going to be taking a look at a Jan versus Ayubid matchup where I'm playing against Kiljardi. This is the Warship Club. We're going to be talking about raiding and how that played an effect in a very unfavorable matchup. So let's talk about the matchup first. We are playing Jan, and we are up against Ayubit. Now, this is not a very typical Jan matchup. It's not something you would like, because what often happens is the Ayubit player just wants a fast castle. You have to deal with Desert Raiders, and Knights aren't very good at doing that. So we have to approach this matchup a little bit differently than we would normally, where most people would like to go for a lot of Knights. We have to do a mix of Archers and Knights to try to get control of this game. For the Ayubid player, they want a fast castle, and then they get their relics, they want to go for their lancers, and then they want to try to get enough units and raid me enough so that I can't really do any damage, whereas I want to stay in feudal. So we start off with our build, which is the same one that is on my channel, the 1TC Aggression Jeanne d'Arc, and we are going to be scouting very aggressively. What happened here is we got one sheep that was just outside of our base, and we managed to get that sheep in here. Now, normally, when you scout, you'll find that if you have 3 sheep and you're playing on the sheep, you're not playing a berry save or anything, that extra sheep makes it so that you don't have to be back at 2 minutes. You can actually keep gathering sheep with your scout and be more aggressive with your scouting route and go all the way around your opponent's base if you have that extra sheep, because now we can now age up without having our scout go back with sheep. So we can go and scout for longer. So what we're going to do is we're going to go out around his base, and we actually managed to get a really good sheep haul this way. So based off of our scouting, we are now taking a look at his base. What are our options? Does he have a very good layout? Does he have a very front spawn layout that's good for us? Or what are we working with here? And what we find is that he has double gold in the back, he has triple berry in the back, and he has wood to the side. And this is not very good for us because this is very easy to defend. It's not very fun to go and try to kill someone who has such a good backspawn, and that can be difficult to deal with. So what we're going to do is we're going to have to be more patient when it comes to playing this game in particular, and we're going to have to be smart when it comes to unit movement. And that's a big part of raiding, because when you're raiding, you want to sort of not take damage yourself whilst you're doing eco damage, and you also don't want to leave yourself too exposed. So we're going to talk about splitting today as well, how splitting your armies can be very effective. Number one rule when you're raiding is going to be, okay, when you decide to raid, what units are you going to use? Are you going to use infantry units that are slower, or are you going to use cavalry? It's quite obvious, but I would say not for everyone. Some people use infantry to raid, and that's a very big risk factor, because if you're using infantry to raid, you have a slower movement speed, and therefore you can't as quick run out. Therefore, you want to use cavalry to do so. Now, there are different types of cavalry. Some cavalry is slower than other cavalry. Horsemen are faster than knights, so if you have a bunch of low health knights, those can be picked off by fast moving horsemen, and that can also be an issue. We get really good sheep haul here, and now we're going to go into knights. We're going to be building an archer range straight after, because as we know, our opponent is playing Desert Raiders. Typically, they're going to open up with military wing 90% of the game, and in this matchup, the Ayubid player wants to open up with a military wing Desert Raider every single time, because it's such a good way to harass the opponent. Therefore, early archers is a great counter. So we have a knight, we have our archers coming now, and now we're heading on to wood. And you can see our splits up here is about 10-5-5. We're scouting our opponent. We're trying to figure out what they're doing. We don't see any production yet. And so here comes the Desert Raider. Jeanne is now leveled up, and we're going to go Knights, Archer, and now we start to pressure. What our opponent can do here is they can open up with a stable to try to deal with our early archers, or they can focus on getting their timing and then try to get a more safe base, such as walling the side here, which is going to be quite cheap. And therefore, from that position, they can go into camel lances later, which is pretty good at dealing with Knight Archer. We continue our scouting. We know that he has scouted this area up here. The only reason we're scouting up here is to figure out where our boar is. Our knight is moving up to the top side, because I know that there's a chance that he's going to be walling. And so that's what we're looking for now. We find that villager, and we kill the villager right after. We're chasing the Desert Raider back home. And now we already have one villager kill. So this is the first stage of raiding, is trying to figure out where are their units, where are their villagers, how defensive are they, do they have defensive units. Here there's a defensive tower, there's that same Desert Raider. So I don't think that there's going to be a barracks, but it's obviously something that I have to watch out for. So we're just going to run Knight Archer. Knight Archer is a great composition because archers counter all the units that counter the knights, and the knights are just a great overall unit that deals a high amount of damage and can deal with stuff like horsemen and archers that deal with the archers that you have. Jeanne in this scenario is pretty much just there as well to deal with the spears. You want to go for the melee version of her so that you can deal with spears easier. At the high level, this is also a deterrent to even go spears for your opponent if you see that they have a melee Jeanne. So this is a very difficult angle to attack from. We have an almost fully walled opponent here with the tower in the back, and all their resources are pretty much safe. So where do we go from here? Well, I would say that playing a civ such as Delhi, Ottoman, Jeanne, you're a civ that is rewarded by playing aggro. You gain a lot from doing aggro. For Ottomans, it's Vizier points from more production. For Delhi, it's Sacred Sites, giving you gold. For Jeanne, it's obviously leveling up. So even if you take bad fights, or maybe like mediocre fights, I would say, you would still get a lot of experience and you can do comebacks with her leveling up. So this is a really good civ for doing dives as well, because we have a large amount of armor upgrades on, not upgrades, armor value on our knights that we can later on upgrade. So one of our timings for diving could be the moment that our opponent goes castle and we have ranged armor is when we can go in and try to kill as many villagers as possible. So that's one timing we're going for. We are now focusing a little bit more on wood, and we're gonna get a blacksmith pretty soon. I think that was dropped here. There we go. We're not looking to go into rams just yet. If you go into rams too early, that can actually be something that is quite unfavorable to you because they're expensive. The technology is also the same cost as ranged armor, and so it could be better for you to have more units. When you're dealing with somebody who's fast castling, and by the way, our opponent just got to castle, that is not something rams is very good at, because yes, sure, you can take out the stable, but if you don't take out the stable, you could have had one more knight. And knights are really good at dealing with army units such as camel lancers, ghulams, so on. So for him, as long as I have knights, he can't play ghulams, which would be great against the archers. And playing camel lancers can be countered by spears, obviously. The thing is, when you're playing with cavalry, you can decide not to fight those spears. So knights are just in general the better choice here. We want to go knight archer. So as I explained before, that our knights can be our main damage dealer. We're looking for damage here on the wood line. We know that he's not here now, and we know that he has a stable. He's obviously going to be making camel lancers. Back home, we are grabbing our ranged armor. We need the ranged armor, as I explained before, to dive. And we know that he has his majority of his villagers out on the berries. We can see the sheep, that there are not a lot of villagers here. So we must assume that they are in the back. And that means that if we decide to dive, we have a very clear movement up here. Talking about raiding, you can do a little bit of bluffing as well. Try to attack on the sides here. This can be a good way to force your opponent to go out, and that is exactly what he does. So he knows that I have a supply route going down this path. This is where all my military units are coming. What he can do here is very smart. He can move out of his base, and then he can take out all of these units one by one because he has cavalry. Again, another argument for playing camel lancers in this matchup. And that's a good way to do raiding under pressure, which I've covered in previous videos. Using this method is a good way to force me to go back and to regain control of this game. But for me, if I can defend against his units, not take too much damage on these units that are moving out, get them back home, then defend with those units, I can actually move into his base because this is his army. So, whereas this is a good way to force me to go back, if it's not a critical mass where if I don't go back I lose the game, I can use this opening, so to speak, to my advantage. So the opening is, okay, he has no units in his base, therefore I can move in. So that's what I do. He's coming back all the way to my base, I just move in, and then I look for villager kills. So that's an opening. Sure enough, he has a few camel lancers here, but he also has all his villagers here. So I actually end up getting a bunch of villager kills just from this movement that he did, and it forced him to go back. I'm now on 12 villager kills because of that exact movement. And that is just so important to realize that when your opponent moves out this early in the game is actually where you win the game. Because if you take out this many villagers this early, the game swings into your favor heavily. I didn't lose too many knights. I killed 14 villagers, and now I'm in a really good position. Now you might ask, how am I going to go from here? I'm actually going to keep on making units because Jeanne didn't level up. And the more I fight, the better. My knights can deal with their camel lances, and therefore, with a villager loss like that, me doubling down on the aggression can actually be a perfect way to finalize this game. With the map control that I have, and him now pushing back, trying to limit that map control, I also have to think about what's the next step in terms of raiding. He's still going to be putting his villagers this direction. Now he's looking for a fight. I click on his units, I realize he has no armor upgrades, therefore my archers, if I get +1 ranged attack on them, they can do pretty significant damage to his units. It's the difference between doing 1 or 2 damage, so it's actually twice as much damage that your archers can put out if your opponent doesn't have ranged attack. So notice how this works. On the minimap, we are moving out, as you can see, but his vision is only this. So he's going around, he's looking for my berries, I place my units here, which means he doesn't see that my knights are moving forward. Again, I'm going to expose him for having all of his units moving out, leaving his base pretty open. So my knights are going to go forward. His units are going to come around the backside. I'm not going to use my archers together with the knights here. I only need the knights. This is a hit and run type of thing. We're going for a quick run through his base, and then we're going to go out again. We don't want to lose our knights. But if we bring our archers, which is slow, and we'll lose all of our archers. So we use them defensively. This is also the time where you would add spears. If you don't add spears now, then this can be a very difficult fight. But if you add spears too early, they can just decide not to fight you. So unless you can force a fight, you don't need spears. It's better to have more Gaza Raiders and archers, or knights and archers, or Sipahis and archers, because spears slow you down, and you could have had more archers and more cavalry. Therefore, use the spears when your opponent wants to fight you, because then the fight swings in your favor. This is a great counter as well. If your opponent's playing heavy cavalry, they're in castle, they will still do a large amount of bonus damage, 28 in total damage. And so this is a great unit for defending if your opponent needs to fight. We are moving towards our enemy base. He's attacking us here. Remember, we have the ranged attack on our archers, so now we actually do pretty considerable damage. Jeanne is also here. I'm pulling a few bills. And now he has to move back again. Now we're moving into his base. We're idling his wood economy again. And now we're just looking for his food. We see his gold villas are here, but we know that they're food villagers. Again, at the same time, we're fighting in the back. And now we find the food villas. So we get some good damage here. We actually win the fight here in the bottom because of our ranged attack. And so this is a lesson in getting upgrades as well. It's very important. Because if you don't get your upgrades, let's say I didn't have +1 ranged attack, that fight might have looked a little bit different. Maybe I wouldn't have had any more archers left. Maybe Jeanne would have died. Ultimately, Jeanne gained a lot of experience. I managed to raid his food eco, because I knew where all his food were. And for me, I can always move away again. Sure, I lost a few knights, but he's now 20 villagers down, which is a pretty much game-ending raid that I just did there. Exposing again the fact that he moved out of his base, and now his base is open. So if I were to go castle now, at this stage of the game, it probably would work. But it's not really the only way I can win this game. Another way would be doubling down. We have our knights. They're fantastic to dealing with something like castle age units. And so doubling down here just means more experience for Jeanne. It means that we have the opportunity to cut the food sources, because at some point he's going to be out of food. And then he's going to have to move out on the map. He has deer here. He has deer over here. And so doubling down on the aggression is probably the best way to contain your opponent and ultimately forcing them to take a bad fight because they need food. As for upgrades, I always prioritize getting the ranged armor, ranged attack. If you get the melee ones, those are not as important, because your knights deal a high base damage of 19. Your archers only deal 5, but they can shoot more. So you get the applied ranged attack more than you would with the melee. We're now checking the deers. Obviously, you can do like this, and then you can look through the fog of war, how many deers are left in the deer camp. If there's fewer than 7, then you know that there's a deer that's been killed. That could be by a villager. Here he's moving around my base again. At this stage of the game, I know that I just have to finish it, because now Jan is leveled up. The way we're going to finish it is to go with rams. And rams are pretty good for dealing with somebody who's already taking a lot of damage, whereas fast castling or just going castle is better if you can't win a fight. So it's really a question of how much damage have you already done, how big is their army. A large castle age army versus a large feudal age army obviously is more scary, but if you can keep taking fights that are good for you to keep their numbers low, then going for a ram push is better here when they have such a defensive base. But if they were to have enough units now to defend, then going for castle age would be better for me. So that is the question you have to ask yourself before you go in and try to make rams and stuff. We are now out of food in our base, and we have to go out on the outside sources. We have the map control, so we can go out as much as we like to. We can also push his base a little bit more. You want to be careful when you push here, because yes, if you can find damage, that's great, but if you lose your entire army here as well, that can also be quite scary. So let's assume I hadn't killed as many villages. I could still take a somewhat beneficial fight, but I'm losing all my units under the TCs. It would be better to take a breather, be patient, go back out, and then just say, okay, now I'm going to go for the rams. I'm going to be a little bit more patient and not look for that last villager, but also lose 2-3 knights doing that. Here we have our Jan doing a ton of damage, but we've also lost a ton of knights. So whereas the game right now, if I keep staying here, I will lose all my units. I have to now realize this and go back out and say, okay, be patient. You have the game right in your hands. It's all about getting that game finished. If I can't finish the game now, because I lose all my units, then that second TC will start paying off. And if I then ultimately start getting raided in my base, and I can't get food anymore because I don't have any more units to defend with, I end up in a situation where all of a sudden I'm the one who has to defend. He's on 2DC, sure, with a little bit of a villager difference. Let's assume it wasn't 28 villages that he had lost. Maybe it was 10. Then it would be a dire situation. So go back out, don't lose all your units, and then say, okay, can I raid the sides? Are there villagers here on the sides? Can I go in from another angle without losing units? And then get your rams. Try to take out the production units first. Then you go for the houses and TCs. I would never prioritize getting the landmarks unless we're talking like 5-6 trebuchets and you're trying to go for the landmark snipe. That can be a good way to end messy games. We're trying to finish this game clean. The way we would finish the game is by taking out the victory condition, which would be the second TC. That's his last way out of this game. Whereas the stables as well is also something you can prioritize, because it would minimize the amount of units that he can put out. So we snipe this villager. We've got the ram. We built 3 rams in total. 3 rams is usually a pretty good amount of rams at this stage. If you're dealing with a tower on a gold, for example, 1 ram is usually enough. If you're trying to take out a second TC, 3 rams is usually better. Okay, so now our base is pretty free. We have nothing here to really worry about. We just have to finish the game. So we're going to speed it up a little bit here. Got the 3 rams. Now we're pushing in. We've got a few knights again. We've got all his villagers on the run. We're going to slow it down a little bit again. Now we're going to prioritize the second TC. The villagers here in the back. There's units. This ram here started prioritizing this TC, which was not on purpose. So now I've lost 2 of my rams. I have 1 left. Should still be good enough. And then it's game over. A little bit of a cheeky Wololo here. Doesn't go through. Got a few more knights. Remember, at the same time, I'm spending all my resources. As you can see, I have no more than 180 resources in my bank. And so all I'm trying to do currently is just spend all my resources. Because if I do that, I'll always have more units coming. And so I'll be producing more than he can kill. And then the game's over. I hope you guys found this video helpful, that you realized maybe something about upgrades or army movement, and you can try to apply these in your games as well. Remember, aggression is always rewarded by these civs, such as Jan, Delhi, Otto, and the more you play aggressive, and the better you get at it, the higher your win rate will be with those civs. Good at scouting, figure out what's your opponent's position, try to get into their head, how are they going to get out of this, and how can you prevent that. If you can get to that stage, you can officially call yourself a pretty good player, because realizing what your opponent's options are is often the way that you actually win the games, by locking them out of those options. So good luck on your games, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Ciao, ciao.